So thank you all. It's great to be back, and it's also terrific, as Chris said, to have talent back on stage in a bunch of different formats. And I think it's hard to live in our industry and not talk about it, not care about it, but unfortunately we do. And it's I think it was a few years ago we were here and we shared a big study and we talked about how important it was. And there's tremendous movement that's happened and a lot of progress. But unfortunately not enough. So I'm thrilled to have with me today Justin Smith, CEO of Bloomberg Media Group, former president of Atlantic Media Company. And Justin and I share a huge passion for the topic of talent and for just the fundamental belief that if you invest time, effort, energy, and your own passion to all aspects of talent and talent management, that it can transform one's business. And another thing that we share are fairly similar business models. I think for most people in the audience, whether it's a media agency, creative agency, media owner, most of our cost basis is north of 55–60% of all of our costs are our people. And we all talk about it and we all hear the metaphors about going up and down in the elevator. But again, we probably all, if we look very honestly at ourselves, don't do enough. So with that, maybe bleak setup, we'll get into hopefully some more inspired thoughts. And I wanted to just open and talk a bit about the Atlantic and the transformation there. I mean, it's really probably one of the best cases of taking what was one of the most esteemed yet tired brands, real business challenges. You doubled revenue in the midst of the global economic crisis, in the midst of people talking about print, which was core to the business, dying, and had one of the most phenomenal turnarounds. I'd love to just get your perspective on that and the role that kind of talent played in that.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here. I'm not sure anyone's familiar with the Atlantic, what used to be called the Atlantic Monthly story. It sort of probably would have been up there in terms of the brands that should have truly died in the disruption and changes that have taken place in global media and U.S. media and print media. And a number of us, and it's always about fundamentally the us, a number of us actually got on this mission. We all loved great content. We loved long-form magazines, and we got on this mission to turn this brand around. And there have been obviously a lot of stories about how an old magazine can become a digital powerhouse of sorts. And of course, the inevitable question is just why? How did you do it? Why if Business Week and which we own and others were sold from McGraw-Hill, if Time Inc. is facing the troubles they're facing, why were we able to do this? And time again, the single most important question was or answer to that was talent. And then I started asking myself, well, how have I spent my days across the last couple of years turning around this venture? And I realized that literally maybe 75, 85, maybe sometimes 90% of my time was focused on talent. I was the president of the company, but I was not the head of HR. And I began, and I realized at the same time that I was spending most of my time talking with the owner, talking with my other colleagues about this subject. And it sort of is an epiphany of sorts where I wondered, how many CEOs out there, how many people leading transformation changes are actually truly spending 75, 85% of their time on this issue, and they're just obsessed with it day in and day out. And this is actually what led to an interesting conversation between Andrew and myself, because we were having drinks one time, and I said, I feel like I'm the head of HR, and and I like it, and it's working but all my time is spent sort of fine-tuning this talent operation from the recruiting side to the management side to the culture side to the retention side. And Andrew, I think, looked at me and said, God, that's so funny. I actually have a similar experience. And you, of course, turned around Arnold very successfully. You're working, obviously, at a much bigger scale now. So your accomplishments are greater and are done at a greater scale. But
no, I think it's something that Justin and I spend a lot of time even today still talking about is, and it was great to hear Jennifer talk about, just right before this, about doing. And I think it's very, very easy to give the subject of talent lip service. It's a lot harder to actually do the work. So this year we just rolled out a global engagement study that was done by Connexa, terrific company. It powers IBM's smarter workforce. And for us, what was critical was not understanding employee satisfaction, which is obviously key, but really understanding how do you drive motivated and engaged employees? What's important to them? We've all seen the studies where compensation is no longer the #1 factor for why people choose a job. It's falling down, and maybe some argue it's underreported, but it's 3, 4, 5, depending on where. And one thing we found is that our office in Chile has more in common than our office in Chicago from an employee engagement standpoint than our office in Chicago would with our office in New York. And so I think the notion of walking the walk, of doing it, is incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, and and I'd ask all of you in the audience who are CEOs, and it really fundamentally starts with an epiphany or a conversion at the leadership level, at the highest level of the organization, which is to say, you know what, to really view your job as sort of almost the chief talent officer yourself. And when you make that leap, or you make that judgment, and your whole schedule and your whole set of priorities actually flows from that decision, you turn to your HR, your talent group, and you say, this has to be the most talented group within the company. HR has to be where the greatest stars are that you have in your firm. That's a different way of thinking about things. When you have your greatest stars leading talent, they become the sort of the first sort of force of recruitment. They become the first ambassadors to your brand, to your mission. And given how competitive things are, and given how hard it is to get entrepreneurial talent into large organizations, having that as a benefit is just absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I think we did a big study on this. There's a great quote about culture from David Wilkie, who runs M50, and he says, culture is what's happening when people aren't looking. And I think it's incredibly important. And the reason why it's happening when people aren't looking is because you do have to your point, you have to cultivate it. You have to make it a key priority. I want to ask you a question about something you mentioned before in terms of how you spend your time. And this is more around the notion of attracting talent. So we all know it's important to kind of retain and develop. We both work in industries that are highly competitive, that there's a lot of mobility, whether it's within the industry or outside. You're now about 6 months in as the CEO of Bloomberg Media Group. Bloomberg, probably widely acclaimed as one of the most entrepreneurial, dynamic companies in the world. The media group's obviously on that same path right now. What do you do to kind of attract the best and bring in the best talent? And what are some of the things that you're doing?
Well, the way I'd frame it, and I for the media business, is that the talent war is even a more specific war. It's a war for entrepreneurial talent. And what's quite remarkable, if you look at digital media, and particularly content-based digital media over the last couple of years, really it's hard to find great examples of innovation in the larger company environments. You have not really seen it. You've not seen massive success stories of traditional companies transforming themselves and disrupting at scale. You're seeing all of this happening at in the startups. There's someone recently did a little study in New York. Apparently, across the last 6 months or 9 months, there have been more digital content startups that have crossed the 100 million unique mark. I think 5 of them in the last 6 months. Than in the history of publishing. We arguably are in the golden age of media, when companies that are 6 months old, a year old, whether it's BuzzFeed or Vox Media or Viral Nova or Elite Daily, are actually building huge audiences. And when you try to understand, what is it that these smaller companies are doing, and you break it down and focus on the specific thing, it's not really the technology fundamentally. It's not the resources, because there's plenty of VC money around. It's ultimately a combination of 2 things. It's the talent and it's the culture. And it's the best word you've heard used to describe this is the alchemy that happens when a kind of a group of talented people get together in the right cultural environment to be able to do something special. And so the challenge to all large companies is how do you actually create that alchemy with the right exact amount of talent? Bloomberg is, as a company, is fortunate because we're a relatively young company, and we're a company that was founded just several decades ago, and our founder is one of the most disruptive thinkers and creative leaders out there, and so we have a little bit of an advantage there, but of course we are still a large company, and the entrepreneurs generally these days are skeptical of large companies. So the first step is to convince these entrepreneurs that you actually can innovate at scale, that you can bring the right talent together, you can create that alchemy. Is what you need to do.
And when you think about and there's a lot of conversation right now of certainly among the client community of role of different partners. So at Bloomberg, you all create an amazing amount of content. The Facebooks of the world, the Googles, everyone's creating content today. So when you look for bringing in that entrepreneurial talent, do you find that your competitive set when you're going into the market and looking for people is different today or different in Bloomberg than it was, not just because it was the Atlantic, but rewinding a few years back?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's changed, I don't know if people have been reading about this, is that the VC community is all of a sudden backing news startups in a much more significant way. There's lots and lots of VC dollars going in, and so I think with a couple of these larger news-based startups, where you got Jeff Bezos investing in the Washington Post, you've got Pierre Omidyar putting $250 million against a new kind of investigative journalism thing. You've got Vox Media with $64 million in funding. You got BuzzFeed with large amounts. That's the competition. That's the competition, and the competition is fundamentally less about money. It's more about convincing people that you are a place where they can innovate, and you are a place where the culture will allow for that. That there's other talent there that they can create that alchemy I described around, and it's a tall order for most big companies, but in some senses, it's actually an incredibly liberating insight, because if you're able to tackle this
right.
and deal with it and create something special in your large company environment or mid-sized company environment, you can actually really break through. And having a few track records of innovation, even though you may come out of a more traditional background, those to point to are also very valuable ways of getting people on board.
And when you think about innovation, when you think about speed, when you think about agility, when you think about all that you all make every day, whether it's through the news organization, through the media group, and then the conversations you have directly with some of the world's leading CMOs about what you can do for them, would love to share a little perspective with the group around kind of the role of agencies and how you see the role of agencies changing.
Well, I think that obviously one thing that's happening is that the media industry is beginning to perhaps compete a little bit more directly with agencies. I think we're focusing on similar talent pools, but increasingly in a world where content marketing and sort of genuine, authentic kind of consumer engagement with great content is becoming the future of advertising. Obviously, media companies with a content expertise are beginning to play a little bit more of an aggressive role directly with clients, obviously many times working with agencies as well. So that's obviously the mega trend, and one which we're seeing play out on a number of different fronts.
And when you think about your talent, kind of the Bloomberg Media Group, and even more broad, stay on the Bloomberg Media Group, 5 years out from now, and your talent kind of makeup then, how will it be different from today?
Well, I think you have to map it to the great trends and the great sort of shifts that are taking place in the media industry and in publishing more broadly. Obviously, and those big great trends are digital transformation, and so more and more companies like ourselves are looking at getting digital natives, the same entrepreneurial type of person I described, into their organizations and creating those cultures from within. I think for our company in particular, Bloomberg's a very global company. We have one of the largest sort of global media footprints for a business media company with television around the world and digital assets around the world. And so increasingly, as our clients and as our customers are cross-border and thinking about issues in that international context, I think that's another major trend underway. I think, you also, if you're looking to hire entrepreneurs, you have to act entrepreneurially when you're hiring them, and so you can't, a lot of the traditional approaches to what the rule book says in terms of how you approach this issue or this issue, I think people are rapidly having to revise them, and because otherwise they're already starting at a disadvantage because there's great skepticism amongst entrepreneurs about large companies. And so if a large company then layers on top of that all these more traditional approaches and sort of check the box things that they need to do, you're effectively putting yourself out of business in terms of recruiting that talent.
So on Tuesdays you wear hoodies to attract. That's your entrepreneurial attraction day, and you're not as formal as this.
No, absolutely. This is Bloomberg is more than just a media company. It's a business to B2B financial and data company, and that's very obviously very present in the financial services sector. So I think the media group and myself probably qualify as some of the least dressed up. But there are days when I wear a tie still, not on the West Coast.
And those aren't days when Mike's sitting next to you.
Well, Mike sits near me every day,
right.
And which is, or put it more accurately, I sit next to him every day.
Right.
He's been back at the company, and it's just been incredible privilege to work with an entrepreneur like that, and actually and pointing to his entrepreneurial DNA and his which he brought to government and which he's brought to he's bringing to philanthropy. Pointing to that is actually a fantastic talent advantage in terms of convincing these types that I'm describing to join our firm.
Yeah, no, I think the notion of entrepreneurialism is one linked to talent that we another one that we probably pay a bit of lip service to and don't give enough action to. I mean, probably in the last 2 months I've had too many conversations with our legal folks around people who want to make sure that they can still do their side passions, whether it's making documentary films, whether it's sitting on the board of a startup that's not competitive with what we do. And the answer is always, from a legal perspective, no, that their employment needs to be very strict and 100% full-time at Havas Worldwide or any of our agencies. And of course there's absolute business sense to that, but my belief is that the way you create an environment of entrepreneurialism when you have people that care about stuff and have passions is to let them keep doing that.
Now, do you find that in the more traditional advertising sort of sector, this same deep desire for entrepreneurship, in the ranks and as a kind of a live or die sort of mandate? Is that do you see that?
I think not enough. I think the kind of cliche is and probably true, the larger the agency, the less entrepreneurial it becomes. And part of that is whether it's process that drives that, whether it's the scale that drives that. But I do think, to your point earlier, it's critical. It's what talent across almost every industry today. It's one of the winning ingredients for what makes great companies great. I mean, whether you're, a old line, traditional Fortune 10 company, or you're a startup, that thread of entrepreneurialism is incredible. So it's something that we actively try to manage and foster and have, programs in place where we encourage people to go out and do their own thing, and there's ways that we manage it so that not everyone is kind of raising their hand and allowed to do it at the same time. But it's something that we are actively trying to manage from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, the other point I just thought that is relevant in the media industry is this idea of particularly if you're looking for a talent transformation process, is to understand and appreciate how much an enemy the notion of incrementalism is. I see lots of different companies sort of saying, again, paying lip service to talent, not making it their obsessive central thing. And so they make a few hires, they change things around the edges, but they don't actually make the very tough and wrenching and often very, very difficult decisions around bringing in a different type of talent. This is particularly Atlantic Media. One of the things that we did very successfully was to actually bring into the organization large numbers of digital entrepreneurs.
Right. Time. One more question I want to just close on. You tweeted, I think it was yesterday or the day before, a really interesting article, Harvard Business Review, citing a Gallup study on the effect of bad managers. And I know that and you and I have discussed this. It's great to focus on bringing in great people, developing great people, retaining great people, but you also need to have as hard a look and care as much about the unfortunate reality of moving people out that aren't doing that. It's a fascinating article. I encourage you all to look at it, and it talked about how just the negative effect having bad managers stay in place in an organization, both in the US and globally, has on a business. So I'd love just to end on your perspective of, it's great to have kind of the big picture and to do all of these things, but how do you handle those hard decisions and tackle that?
Well, again, I think it's back to this question of lip service versus obsession. So if you just say, you talk about talent, yeah, it's an important thing, or are you obsessive about it and you make it your business every single day? And it's the same idea, I think, about management. Do you just talk about it and say it's a good thing, or do you actually invest deeply and become obsessive about teaching management, about promoting great standards for management? I think that, the main reason why I think a lot of management promotions don't work out is because oftentimes people are not promoted for necessarily their management ability. They're promoted for their skill set or their achievements in a much more narrow kind
Why
of
are you looking
vertical.
at me when you're saying
I know.
I'm feeling very awkward.
He's built his career on this. But it's again, it's like the broader point about talent. It's about not just talking about it, but becoming obsessed with it and making it part of your thinking, of your culture, of your actions. It's taking lots of your time. That's the central point.
So closing 3 thoughts for the audience before everyone goes and have a coffee break. As a super successful serial entrepreneur who's led transformations, the Economist before the Atlantic, if you were to leave everyone with a few bits of parting advice.
No, I would just leave. It's one bit of advice, which is that it's almost like the CEO and the chief talent officer should switch jobs, or I can't. I've been trying to think of the percentage without seeming too kind of exaggerating about it. The percentage of your time you should spend on talent, and as I get higher and higher in my mind, from 75 to 80 to 85 to 90 to 95, you can actually make an argument for almost 100%, and because if you get that piece right, if you are so obsessively focused on that piece, everything else works. Sure, you need strategy. Sure, you need to understand, your marketplace you're operating in. Sure, you need great products. But all those things, the great products and great strategy, they actually come from that first thing that I'm talking about. So, do a talent audit of your firms and do a talent audit of yourself. Honestly, answer how much time do you spend every week, every day on this question. Are you paying lip service? Are you obsessed? And I'd say the closer you are to obsessed and the closer you are to 100% of your time on talent, the better off you'll do.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you all.